views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
And hello, everyone, and welcome to Open, the one and only show that opens the Bronx and the rest of the world right to you. I'm your host, Daren Jaime, and today we're going to update you on what's happening in and around our borough, as well as across New York City. Coming up on today's show, we go front and center with the issue of depression and anxiety. We'll learn about the signs and symptoms to know if you or someone you care about may be suffering from this serious disorder. Also, we'll discuss the New York sick leave law and how it will now be implemented come January 2021. And then we're going to talk about birth injury cases in Bronx hospitals and the legal way families can tackle the issue. And then a little bit later on in the show, we're going to speak with the director of the AARP New York State on the impact of COVID-19 on seniors and what actions need to be taken to assist those that may be affected. And then finally, we'll learn about an award recognizing and celebrating extraordinary public school teachers who inspire learning through creativity, passion, and commitment. So stay tuned because all this and much more is heading your way because right now, we're officially open. Welcome to Open. I am Daren Jaime, and today is Wednesday, November 4th, and you're watching Open, a live program that brings the Bronx and New York City straight to you. We also want to welcome our viewers on Manhattan Neighborhood Network as Open is being broadcast live simultaneously on the MNN channel. We encourage you also to stay connected to us on all of our social media platforms at BronxNet TV. Well, a lot has certainly been going on through the past week in New York City and the borough of the Bronx, and can't take you through it all. We take you through a couple things with our Bronx updates. We start off with COVID-19 news. New laws have come in allowing traveling into New York as travelers will now be required to undergo coronavirus testing before and after traveling to New York. Governor Andrew Cuomo announced the policy replaced the travel advisory requiring travelers from states with significant community spread of COVID-19 to self-quarantine for 14 days after arrival into New York. The new policy also requires anyone traveling into New York to test negative for the virus within 3 days prior to travel. Also, once they arrive in New York, travelers must quarantine for 3 days and on the 4th day be tested for the virus again. If they test positive, travelers will be required to quarantine for an additional 14 days. New Yorkers who travel outside the state for less than 24 hours must also get tested for COVID-19 within 4 days of their return. That's all the time we have for our Bronx updates. We want you to stay connected to us. We'll have more Open returning right after this.
We know that people are dealing with the health crisis, but there's also a lot of food insecurity.
We're giving out healthy food options, and that's what's key here.
If you're a senior, you have a disability, they'll actually deliver meals to you.
The residents are anxious, they're worried, they're scared, they want to be tested.
When things were happening in our community and we couldn't get the help.
There's almost a presumption of criminality that attaches to your skin color.
The site will prioritize those who are at highest risk in the population.
If you feel symptoms and you'd like to visit one of these COVID-19 testing sites here in the Bronx, you may call the State Health Department's hotline.
Important to note about this site is no reservations are needed. This is a walk-in clinic.
A lot of us are out of work and looking for something to do.
We have the machinery and the skills to make large scales of these masks and gowns.
Take care of your people. It's going to go way further than we actually can understand.
Right now, employees like myself are just adjusting to the new reality.
And welcome back. Collective stress and anxiety has surged in the year 2020. Almost 50% of Americans between the ages of 18 and 29 said that they've experienced symptoms of anxiety and depression this year, according to a June survey from the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Now, among those surveyed, women, Black, and Latino Americans were more likely to be affected. The question is, what are the signs and symptoms for you or someone that you care about that may be suffering from serious anxiety or depression, or simply may be in need of professional help? Joining us now to share a little bit more and talk about it is the licensed clinical social worker and an associate director with community mental health services at VNS-NY, Deirdré DeLeo, and we are thanking you for joining us here, Deirdré.
Daren, thanks so much for having us and allowing VNS-NY to talk about the programs and to talk about how everybody's being affected. It's been one heck of a year, right? We started out with the pandemic. We have the holidays coming up, and that's bringing up a lot of thoughts and feelings for people because we're still dealing with the pandemic. We're still dealing with our children in school, whether they're going in person or hybrid or full remote. We have people that are facing joblessness. So there's a lot going on, and a lot of people are having feelings about that.
And when you talk about these feelings, I mean, people have feelings, but I think the thing that was pretty startling to me was looking at, as we said in the intro, those that are between the ages of 18 to 29. Now, normally this is a group of people who, for all purposes, should be pretty stable during the season, but we're hearing more from them. I've got anxiety, and I'm also dealing with depression.
Right. You know, and if they're feeling that, can you imagine what our children are feeling, what our older adults are feeling? We're all experiencing this together. And on top of having all of these extra feelings of depression and anxiety, we still have to social distance. We still are, you know, looking at maybe a second sheltering at home coming up for the fall and the winter. So these are bringing on. So we wanted to kind of talk about what anxiety and depression could look like for someone and when to reach out for help.
Yeah. So let's walk through this. If I'm a person that's suffering from anxiety, if I'm a person that's suffering from depression, I want to be able to understand and know what I'm possibly dealing with here. And some people don't even know. They just have feelings. They don't know that I have anxiety. So for somebody, let's start with anxiety, who doesn't know about anxiety, what exactly is anxiety in terms of symptoms?
Sure. So anxiety is having excessive worry. So, you know, you're feeling anxious most days, and that usually looks at a 6-month period of time. So we're 7.5 months into the pandemic. So if you're still having a lot of worry, and that worry could look like having constant stomach aches, you could be getting tension headaches, you could be feeling really restless and wanting to move around all the time and having a hard time sitting still. It can affect your sleep. So you want to talk to somebody anytime that worry is affecting your functioning. You want to look at, we're all worried, right?
Mm-hmm.
Including yourself, Daren. But if it's affecting your functioning, your day-to-day things, if you're not able to work because you're so worried, or you're not able to take care of your family because you're so worried, or you're not talking to friends, it's time to reach out and ask for help.
Yeah. Let's talk about depression. That is another thing. Sometimes you've got someone who's depressed, doesn't even know they're depressed. For family, for a person, an individual, how do you define depression as far as symptoms?
Right. So you want to look at, depression is usually over a 2-week period of time that you want to look at. So if somebody's having marked change in their sleep or their appetite, so someone who was getting normal 6, 7, 8 hours of sleep, and now they're not able to sleep at all, or they're sleeping 12 hours a day, changes in appetite. Some people are emotionally eating. I think we can all identify with that from time to time.
Yes.
Other people have loss of appetite. So if there's a change in your weight of like 20 pounds or more, something you might want to think about if it's over a couple of weeks, you want to look at people who are no longer finding joy in doing things. So if somebody enjoys doing the crosswords, and now it's like, nope, can't do it, don't want to do it, just don't feel up to it. So you want to look at things like that. you also want to look at people who were maybe a little bit more social and now they're kind of pulling back from everybody. And I know it's harder to look at that in the current times because we're not able to be as social as we were, but we are still able to maintain some contact with our friends via Zoom, like we're doing today, or telephone. So someone who's a little bit more outgoing and they start to pull back, you want to look at that. And again, it's something that's going for at least 2 weeks. It's not just one bad day, because we all have bad days. But when you have a series of days that you're feeling like that, some people feel very irritable when they're depressed. They don't necessarily identify as feeling sad, just people are getting under their skin more frequently.
So if I'm a person that's dealing, right, and I've got this funk that I'm dealing with in terms of anxiety and possibly depression, I know there's some things I could possibly do in addition to professional help. We always can seek professional help, but what about self-care? Because there may be some things I'm not practicing that could help me out. There may be a different kind of mindset that I need to adopt. So walk us through what are those possibilities for those who are having anxiety and depression, some self-care.
Sure. So self-care has kind of changed during this pandemic and during these times now. We used to think of self-care as kind of pampering yourself and doing something out of the norm that you wouldn't normally do. Now we kind of look at self-care as keeping to a schedule, making sure that you have consistent nighttime routines, that you get sleep, 7 hours of sleep at least, right? You want to make sure that you're eating every day. For those of us that are working remotely, make sure that you take lunch. We don't always do that. You want to make sure that you're not watching the news 24/7. I know it's hard to do in this environment right now, but you want to unplug from the electronics. You want to put the smartphone away. You want to stay off the internet. You want to give yourself a break. You want to schedule in time to do things for you. If there's something that you enjoy, like reading a book or listening to music, make sure that you take time to do that for yourself.
And how hard is it sometimes to have it together and then you find out, oh my God, I'm really, I'll wait another day. And as you said, a day can actually turn into weeks. And then before you know it, you find yourself in a place that you really didn't want to be in.
Sure. Like I said, for depression, the amount of time that we look at is 2 weeks. So if you're looking at a period of weeks that you're feeling in this funk, as you described it before, and you can't get out of it, you really need to speak to somebody. You can speak to your medical provider. You can reach out to a local mental health clinic. VNSNY happens to have, a whole department to deal with mental health issues. We have a mental health clinic in the Bronx. We have some in-home mental health programs. There's a 24-hour hotline that's run by NYC Well. And of course, all of our programs, including NYC Well, are all funded by the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. But NYC Well is 24 hours. You have a question, you can reach out and call them and say, here, this is what I'm going through. And they can point you to programs like we have here at VNSNY or other programs that may be more convenient to where you live.
Are we hearing anything in particular, like some common themes or some common threads during this time? I mean, I know we're all dealing with COVID-19. Are there any common threads that you're hearing on your side?
Sure. People are afraid to be outside because of COVID-19. There's, issues about racial inequity that people are worried about. And people are sitting at home with their loved ones more often, so they're seeing things that they wouldn't necessarily see in their loved ones. So if you're concerned because you're seeing these behaviors that we talked about, please talk to your loved one and or reach out to NYC Well to get some help.
Yeah. These are very important information, especially as we get close to the holidays. Thank you for taking the time and sharing with us and being with us here on Open.
Thank you so much for allowing us to talk about our programs, Daren, and, be well.
You stay safe too as well. All right, well, I want to let you know that if you want more information about their programs, as we mentioned, all you got to do is visit their website, vnsny.org. Once again, vnsny.org, or you can call 1-800-675-0391. Once again, that number 1-800-675-0391. We are taking a quick break. Don't go anywhere. Open will return right after this. And welcome back. Late in September, the New York sick leave law went into effect. Under the law, companies must provide employees 1 hour of paid or unpaid sick leave for every 30 hours worked by an employee. Now, although employers must pay the employee at the regular rate of pay, they can provide additional benefits to the employees as part of their sick leave policy in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. Many individuals wonder how this law will be implemented. And here to share a little bit more with us is attorney Jeffrey W. Pagano. And Jeffrey, good to have you.
Nice to see you today. Hope all is well. Hope all is safe for you and your family.
Yeah, same here. And we're just trying to make it and try to stay safe. But as we talk about family, of course, this law in particular really gives some help to those people who possibly may be dealing with this issue of sick leave. So walk us through exactly what the law calls for.
Well, the largest point that I can make is it's a misnomer to call it a sick leave.
Okay.
It's really about leave for specific purposes. And the first way of looking at it, well, who gets it? And then the second way is, well, what is it that what people get? And from my perspective, employers who are very small, those who are 4 employees or below, if they exceed $1 million in revenue, then bottom line is they have to provide it. So, and again, what is it? It's 40 hours effective January 1 or the anniversary of the person's hired. Now, keep in mind, it's a moving target because the government, both New York State and New York City, keeps issuing, alerts and guidance. So as a practical matter, what the whole scheme is about is how do we give people time to address things that typically arise in the home or within the family and not have them jeopardize their jobs in the process.
Yeah.
So for example, it applies to, now keep in mind, if you're over 100 employees, you have to provide 56 hours. Now, New York City has had this in effect for years. And so since 2014. So in a way, New York City is now upping their process to the New York State process. For example, it used to be in New York City that you had to have a certain waiting period. The waiting period's over with, or you had to accrue, or you had to work so many hours. That's eliminated. As of right now, as of September 30th, all employers are accruing for full and part-time employees, including seasonal employees, sick leave that will be effective January 1. Now, the usages, which is really why people ought not to think of it as sick leave, is what's important to understand. For example, an employee's or employee's family member's mental or physical illness or injury,
right,
or health condition, the diagnosis or care of an employee's or their family member, mental or physical illness, injury, or health condition.
Let me also jump in here and ask the question. I also understand that stalking, possibly human trafficking,
Yes.
These are things that are also included in this as well.
Yes, in fact, yes, it's stalking. It's, the care for the child whose school or child care has somehow been eliminated. And really where it gets to is it allows you the time off to participate in the process. So for example, stalking, the time off it's necessary to contact the police or to contact an attorney is time off that's within the sick leave. So in a way, life's harm is covered by sick leave. And so an employer cannot eliminate the person's employment as a consequence of these events occurring in the person's life, the employee, or a family member. So if you're a guardian, this course would apply.
Yeah. But when we hear from employers, sometimes there's a little bit of a pushback, right? And the pushback for employers is saying this is a little bit too much. As an attorney, how do you weigh this out?
I represent primarily employers, and my vision always has been compliance.
Mm-hmm.
And an employer who has an ethic of compliance retains its employees. Now some may say, Jeff, it's easy for you to say, you don't have to spend the money. But at the end of the day, why afford employment attorneys on the plaintiff side, be it against a restaurant in New York City or out here in the East End or wherever? Why provide the money to them? Provide it to your people. And keep in mind, the 40 hours you can either front load or accrue. Now the accrual is based on hours worked. So bottom line is, after 1,200 hours, the employee will have the 40 hours of sick leave each year, if that's the way you're going to do it. Or you can front load it and give it to him or her. But keep in mind, it is true what you're saying. The difficulty on the employer's side will be this. Number one, you can't ask for the specific situation. All you can ask for is a general, basically I would call a general reason for you to put in your notes, because confidential information need not be disclosed by the employee. So it will be subject to abuse. You can discipline the employee for the improper use of it, but it's only afterwards. So for example, an employee extends his or her vacation by a day by claiming sick leave, and you discover it afterwards. That could be a dischargeable event. But if it's just a day off and you are been given the representation in oral or written form by the employee that my grandmother is very ill and I need to take care of her, you're probably going to have to, without other evidence of partying or going on vacation, you're going to have to pay out the sick day. So yes, it is subject to abuse. And the employers are basically limited in what they can request, because again, no confidential information such as medical condition or care need be disclosed, be it of the employee, the parent, the grandparents, the children, the stepchildren, the foster children, the guardian ad litem children, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Before we go, I got one final question for you. Is there any process on the part of employers, as you said, you represent employers, is there any process in part that can actually grant some appeal or of the law or look to reform it more to the employer's benefit?
No. And simply put, it is what it is. It's signed by Governor Cuomo. Look, the key for employers is compliance with the weekly payroll information that is necessary to account for that which has been accrued and that which has been used each payroll period. Where the employers are going to get caught is the lack of compliance and the lack of notice. A, the posting, and B, they have a posting that's issued, go on the New York State website and the New York City website. You'll see the posting. Number two, you have to give them the notice of it when they're hired. What is the sick pay? And number three, the weekly checks must include information as to the accrual and use of sick leave. If you're compliant in that regard, you probably will not have a problem as long as you are allowing them the days off.
All right. Well, we have to leave it there, Jeffrey. Thank you so much for joining us. Of course, we'll be able to follow this story and more as we get into the new year. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Have a good day.
All righty. Well, we want you to stay with us here on Open. We do have more show coming up. Open will return right after this.
When taking public transportation, don't touch your phone. Carry hand sanitizer and use it immediately upon leaving the bus or train. Avoid touching your face. If someone is coughing or sneezing, move away. Wash your hands with soap and water as soon as possible. Limit contact with poles. If possible, avoid rush hour. Don't eat or drink on public transportation. Keep your bag off the floor or other surfaces. Avoid directly touching turnstiles. Stay up to date with the latest from your local health department and CDC.
And thank you for staying with us. A birth injury or a death of an infant profoundly affects any family. The loss or harm to a child changes the way people live forever when medical negligence is found to have caused the harm. Particularly, the feelings of sadness and anger can also become quite overwhelming. When the medical providers displayed negligence instead, the parent or injured party may wish to consult with a birth injury law firm. Recently, the Jacob Fuchsberg law firm just settled a landmark case in the Bronx involving a hospital that's actually destroying fetal monitoring strips, which were critical in evidence to a case. Joining us to share more in this is the managing partner of Jacob Fuchsberg law firm, Bradley Zimmerman. And Bradley, good to have you.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
It's an important topic to talk about when we talk about, the situations of birth injuries and then also deaths of infants. And I know particularly here in the borough of the Bronx, you pay particular attention. So talk to us a little bit more about this case.
Well, first of all, let me just say that when you actually, as a parent of, a newborn child, the expectation is during the course of the prenatal care and ultimately the delivery that the child's going to be healthy. And it's every parent's dream to have a healthy child, right? More than anything just about in the world. And so when that dream is not a reality, ultimately the parents are obviously very angry, upset, and have to deal with and have to ultimately use all of their costs, in other words, all of the money that they have, presumably to take care of this child for lifelong damages. And so what we do as attorneys, when parents come to us with these devastating injuries to their children, and some are catastrophically injured, some can't walk, some can't talk, some have cerebral palsy, some have strokes. What we do is we gather all of the evidence for them, and we look at all of the medical records, and we act as forensics detectives, and we try to determine exactly what went wrong in these circumstances. And one of the main records that we look at is the fetal heart monitoring strips, because the fetal heart monitoring strips basically demonstrate the heart rate of the baby as it's going through the labor process. And there are many stresses to the labor process, right? You have a first stage, and then you have a second stage, and ultimately the baby's delivered. And if mom becomes exhausted, baby becomes exhausted, ultimately the baby may lose oxygen. And because there's not a physician that actually decides to perform a C-section on time, many times those babies are delivered without oxygen and ultimately with cerebral palsy and the damages that flow from that injury, which are devastating. And so we as attorneys, we have to explain the procedure to the individual, the mom and the dad, exactly what transpired in the delivery or prenatal care that may have given rise to these injuries. And it's very important, therefore, that when a mom or dad go to the hospital for the delivery process, that they advocate for themselves. And if they're concerned about the fetal heart rate, if they see it going down, ask questions, make certain that you're there protecting the lives of your child. And remember, the doctors have a responsibility not just to mom, but to the baby as well. Both are their patients. So we as attorneys have to collect all of this evidence and make certain that what went wrong, they be held accountable for, the physicians, the hospital, the institutions. And what happened in the case, coming back to your question, is that these specific records from this Bronx hospital were actually purged and destroyed. And we recognize this because we ask for these records routinely. And the failure to provide those records was obviously a significant part of the assessment that we were going to have in terms of proving, by the way of evidence, what had transpired. And so, the court and New York State has a specific remedy for the failure to produce records, and specifically if they've purged or destroyed records, and that's either a negative inference that is instruction to the jury, basically saying that the jury can infer that the evidence that would have been presented had it not been destroyed is in the plaintiff's favor, the person bringing the action. And under that circumstance, the jury can actually find against the defendant for the failure to produce those records. And the threat in that case was that we were going to be moving and making a motion to strike their answer, strike any defense they had because of their failure to produce those crucial and important records.
How often do we see this happen? I mean, obviously, you're talking about a failure to produce records, destroying records in hospitals. From your work in this particular field, do we see this happen often?
You know, it does not happen as often as we used to see it. However, there are always those times and experiences that we've had along the course of our career that we've seen records changed. And, you know, there was just a recent case which came down where a doctor had actually discarded and destroyed her records after the litigation had begun. And in that case, punitive damages were actually asserted, and there was a finding of punitive damages against that doctor for the purging and destroying of those records. So even though in medical malpractice, it's usually very difficult to prove punitive or exemplary damages, in that case, the court was obviously felt that the evidence, and the jury believed that there was a preponderance of evidence that demonstrated that in that setting, the doctor actually should be made an example of in terms of a monetary loss for actually discarding, purging, and destroying those records. So it does happen from time to time, but if it doesn't happen, you know, many times we'll see addendums to records where the doctors will attempt to memorialize what they believe happened after understanding that the child has been injured at birth. We've seen that many times. We've also seen doctoring of records in a specific case that I handled, where the doctor had written in a record that was written after the fact. And so we do see this from time to time. I'm not going to say it's the norm, it's not, but it does happen. One of the interesting recent advances in computer technology allows us to use what we call audit trails. The electronic records now have an audit trail that provide physicians, doctors, lawyers with a trail of who actually changed the record, right? And so we can, as attorneys, discover that information through requests for those audit trails, and we can determine who may have made, changed, altered those records in favor of the hospital doctor as opposed to the patient who we're most concerned about.
Yeah. Let me jump in. I got a couple of minutes left with you here. I wanted to talk to you about African-American maternal deaths. I understand that there is an increase in that. Tell us what you're finding and what can you bring to us?
Well, maternal death is one of the most awful experiences any family can have. And what we've seen since there was a CDC assessment in 2020, looking back in 2018, and throughout the United States, first of all, the maternal death statistic is 17.4 deaths for every 100,000 moms. So you can imagine that's a very, very large statistic. And, you know, in the United States alone, the United States is ranked, and you won't believe this, is ranked 46th among the countries of the highest rate of maternal death. So there are countries like Saudi Arabia, Portugal, and other countries that, you know, you wouldn't expect to be having a lower maternal death rate than the United States. And also, you know, the United States invests so much money in medical care, and the fact that we're down at number 46 is just, you know, unacceptable. And looking at specifically the African American community, specifically, you see that African Americans, in terms of maternal death, are dying at over 2 times the rate of white women. And that is, again, unacceptable. And specifically in New York City, it's up to even 4 times the rate. And so you can see that there must be, we ask ourselves, why is this happening? Why is this occurring? And this is the result of a systemic problem that we know that is in the community, and with respect to the care that's being provided. Doctors, physicians, hospitals have to do better for these patients. And now we have COVID-19, where we have another systemic issue and affecting that community. It's not acceptable. It can't be justified. And we have to make changes related to the care that we provide. Everybody in America is required to be provided accepted standards of care. That should be across the board. And when that doesn't happen, we see members of this community, members of the African community, dying, literally, because of these mistakes. And it's not acceptable. And we as lawyers, at the forefront of what we do is we're protecting the families by bringing these cases, and ultimately making a difference in their lives and hopefully making a difference in the care that's provided to this community.
Bradley, we got to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing. Of course, we'll continue to monitor this and some of the other things that you talked about, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk to you in the new year.
That'd be great. Thanks so much for having me.
All righty, Bradley Zimmerman, our guest here on Open. Listen, stay with us. We've got more show. Don't go anywhere. We're coming right back right after this. Welcome back. According to a new AARP Foundation and United Health Foundation report, social distancing measures have implemented during the pandemic have actually led to an epidemic of loneliness. The report found over half of the adults aged 50 and older said they felt isolated during the onset of the coronavirus. Of those who said they experienced social isolation, half of those said they felt unmotivated, 41% were very anxious, and 37% said they were very depressed. AARP New York and 27 other organizations from across the state are urging the state assembly to pass a bill that's actually aimed at better preparing New York's long-term care system, including our nursing homes, for a potential second wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as future health emergencies, and avoid repeating the mistakes of 2020. Here now to share a little bit more in our discussion, we are pleased to be joined by Beth Finkel, and Beth Finkel shares with us here, and glad to have her. She's the director of AARP New York, and Beth, welcome to Open.
Thank you so much for having me.
So when we talk about these numbers and these statistics, obviously quite startling, given the fact that when you talk about how we are as a country trying to navigate through COVID-19, looking at a second wave, it's a potential that these numbers may also continue to rise.
Yes, I think we're starting to experience it now. We know that in New York, thankfully, we've been keeping it within the safe zone. But that doesn't mean people's anxiety is not rising because they're worried where the red zones are and the orange zones and the yellow zones. And obviously people who are older are more fragile. And there's a good chance that they might be more susceptible. And then if they get COVID, they could experience it worse. So they have to be very careful. And government has to be very careful in how they handle older adult populations. And as you said, as you opened up this piece, that the issue is how do we balance that with feelings of anxiety, depression, and isolation. And that's something that we all have to take seriously. And we all have to figure out ways to ameliorate. And that's difficult in this case.
Yeah. And so when we talk about the epidemic, the virus is an epidemic all by itself, not even an epidemic. We call that the pandemic. But when we talk about loneliness and when we talk about anxiety, this is an epidemic that's we're dealing with.
So, even before the pandemic, AARP has done a lot of research on isolation. And in fact, being isolated is equal on your health of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It's pretty staggering to think of that. So that affects, your whole well-being. And when you look at indicators of health, we all know that smoking is one of them, but isolation is another piece that can build into not only your immediate health, but also your long-term effects of health on your life and on your longevity. So it's something that we really have to take very, very seriously.
Yeah. But when we talk about seniors, we talk about those who are the most vulnerable population, particularly to COVID-19. And then you talk about this issue of isolation and loneliness. You got here the virus that you have to contend with, isolation and loneliness. And so it really becomes a compound effect on the lives of those who are considered the eldest.
That's exactly right. And that's why our government leaders have been really good about trying to figure out ways to make sure that we can deliver services to older adults, but at the same time be careful about not bringing them into congregate settings where they don't need to be, even though they might be craving them. And so you look at New York City and you look at the senior centers in New York City, which is such a thriving society for older adults in New York. And they deliver not just food, people can get their meals delivered, they can come in and get congregate meals and get together with their friends and their neighbors. And at the same time, people in the actual senior centers in normal times can kind of eyeball Mrs. S and say, oh, this is not good weather today, and Mrs. S came out without a coat on. What's that about? Do we need to probe a little bit and make sure that Mrs. S is in a safe, sound situation? We don't have that today, right? Because people can't get eyeballed the same way, right? Because very often they're in their homes. And, another way was meal delivery, where people would linger. They do their meal delivery, and then they'd be able to eyeball folks. These are all great systems that have been in place, but with COVID, with the pandemic, things have changed. And so our government has stepped in doing wellness checks. AARP has also been doing wellness checks. We have volunteers who are calling people all across the country. If they go online to AARP.org and say that they would like some friendly visiting or someone to chat with, we will connect them with AARP volunteers from all over the country. You never know who you're going to get. You might get to go to somebody from Texas, who knows? And they will kind of say, how are you doing today? And here's what things are like in Texas today. How are things doing in the Bronx today? So I recommend that on AARP.org.
Yeah, go to AARP.org and get that information that could actually be beneficial in helping you. Talk about being beneficial in helping. One of the things I do understand, though, even with seniors today, is the struggle for internet and broadband access. A lot of seniors still struggling. You would assume that in this Wi-Fi society, in this technological world, that everybody has got service. But and I know, and you can share more, with more of your expertise, how it's really affecting seniors in the area of technology.
That's really interesting because although older adults are the fastest adopting of technology, there are limits depending on, again, if you're isolated, you might not have somebody who can come by your apartment and help give you a little bit of pointers, right? It's hard when you don't have any kind of support in place to help you get up to speed. And then on top of that, broadband is really, it's available, but not totally available everywhere. New York has not done thorough mapping to really understand where broadband is and where it isn't, and how well it's actually working. So it's been mapped to census data, but the problem is that it's not been double checked. So you might think it's on a full block, but you might find out that there's spottiness within that block. We're asking state government to map it properly so people really can get a sense, of policymakers can really get a sense of what more needs to be done to ensure that broadband is there for everyone of all ages. And then on top of that, it's, as I said before, how do we make sure that we get the skills and training out to older adults who might need a little bit of hand-holding on this? Thing I do all the time, all of us. You and I both had technical problems this
Right.
You know. So again, there are some services in the city. There's also an organization called OATS, Older Adult Technical Services, and I really recommend people check out their services. And I know that the DIP, the New York City Department of Aging, has also been doing some great work on this. And at the same time, they've been offering a lot of virtual programming for people who can access their computers or their iPads or whatever, and that can make such a huge difference in people's lives.
Yeah. Before we go, I only got a minute left, but I want to ask you to talk a little bit about legislation that's coming up and what New Yorkers can do in terms of supporting legislation that you guys have put forward.
Well, first of all, we would love to have them call the governor's office and ask them about this mapping that we need to be able to actually say where broadband is and isn't. City Council has also taken up this issue, so please call your City Council person. Say this is important to you. This is important to your family. As we all know, this is not just about older adults. We have kids in school who really need help. And we've got to make sure that there's internet all over the place because they can't go camp out in their libraries these days in the same way that they might have. And we need to make sure that there's an even playing field for everyone because broadband is the new most essential thing. You know, there's the old Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You got food and you've got home, shelter. Broadband belongs in that same place because you cannot succeed in this modern day society. Not to even mention telehealth, and we didn't even get into that. We'd love to talk about that, right? People need to get telehealth in this world of a pandemic. We got to make sure people can get connected to telehealth first.
Right, right. And I mean, it's something that we have to take a look at, and hopefully we'll continue to follow. Beth Finkel, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing with us here on Open, and certainly opening our eyes to a lot of the challenges that particularly our most vulnerable population faces. Thanks a lot, Beth. We encourage you, please don't go anywhere. We still have more Open coming up right after this.
Most at risk for coronavirus. People over 65, people with underlying medical conditions like heart disease, chronic lung disease, asthma, diabetes, people undergoing cancer treatment, and people with weakened immune systems. What should you do if you or a loved one is at higher risk? Avoid close contact with people, avoid crowds, stay home if you can, wash your hands frequently, learn more ways to protect yourself and others at coronavirus.gov.
And welcome back. The Flag Awards for Teaching Excellence celebrates the work of New York City public school teachers who devote countless hours to supporting and enriching the lives of their students. Now, the vast majority of Americans rely on public schools, where teachers help students thrive despite low budgets, large class sizes, and other obstacles that are actually preventing them from being the best that they can be, particularly in the public school system, particularly during the current pandemic. The Flag Award for Teaching Excellence opened its nomination process for a school year's awards program. And joining us to tell us a little bit more about the Flag Awards is the founder of the Flag Award for Teaching Excellence, Glenn Fuhrman. And Glenn, good to have you.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you.
And a special shout out to you for creating this award. But I know that you really want to be able to highlight teachers, especially teachers who are, doing their best during this time. But give us a little bit about why you decided to create the Flag Award.
Yeah, I mean, I think my wife and I one day really just had kind of an epiphany. We have 3 young children, all of whom are either in kindergarten or in 3rd grade. So they're kind of young and dealing with their own schooling like every child. But I think we've really come to appreciate how important their teachers are in the process of getting them educated. At the same time, I grew up going only to public schools. My mom was a public school teacher. My wife's mom was a teacher. We had a lot of teachers in our community, in our family. My aunt was a public school teacher. So, I think the background of me having a lot of great teachers that helped me get on the right course, and then seeing our own children going through the process just made us really appreciate what teachers do. And frankly, that teachers are not as celebrated as they should be because they are really the most essential workers we have. And, look, we founded the award before COVID. But I think once everybody started doing all this remote learning, at least I speak for myself, I've had never as much appreciation as I do today for the value of teachers, because when I try to just teach my kids even one little thing at home, it's extremely difficult. So I really, have gained tremendous additional respect that I already had a high level of.
New respect for teachers you have earned. So talk to us about how I'm out here and I say, hey, there's a teacher that's worth honoring. What's the process like and what's the deadline?
Sure. Well, first, let's just get to the punchline. The winning teachers get $25,000 in cash. The teacher's school also gets $10,000. So, everybody wins in the process. And you can go to the website flagaward.org and anybody can nominate a great teacher. If you're a parent of a student, if you're a colleague, if you're a principal, if you just know of somebody that you think is a great teacher. You can't nominate yourself, so that's the only thing you can't do. But we want to really have this process also make everybody appreciate just great teachers. So it's not just about the winners. And last year we had a total of 22 winners because not everybody is the grand prize winner. There's cash awards all the way through for semifinalists, finalists included. But we wanted just everybody to take a moment and say, well, geez, that teacher is really great. We should nominate that teacher. Or this other teacher is amazing. We should nominate this teacher. So, we're going to get thousands of nominations. And I think every part of that process, making somebody recognize to themselves the value of a great teacher is really part of what we're trying to accomplish here. Just have everybody think about teachers in a new light because they are doing incredible things for us, our communities, and society at large.
Yeah. Talk to me about criteria. So, you talked about you can nominate a teacher. Any particular things that a person should be highlighting?
I think it's hard to define exactly what makes a great teacher, but clearly it's a passion for what they do. It's genuinely caring about their students. It's about challenging and inspiring your students for greatness. It's working with the community, working with your colleagues, working with the parents. It's just somebody that just cares deeply about providing the best education possible for their students and really customizing it for the specific students at hand, because as we all know, every single student is different and they have different needs to get where they want to go along the education path. And great teachers are able to adapt their message to the many different needs of their individual students in a classroom or on a Zoom. The whole Zoom thing obviously is throwing the definition of a great teacher into a whole new world.
If you can prevent your student from being a Zombie, yes, you definitely can be considered a great teacher. Give me a little bit. You've had past honorees before, so talk to us about last year's honoree and what that person brought to the table.
Sure. Last year's winner was Lou Lahana. He is an amazing teacher. He actually will be one of the jurors this year, so he'll be judging and helping us select a winner, along with the other incredible members of the jury. I have no say in who wins. My wife has no say who wins. There's an independent jury. But, look, Lou, I think, represents all of the things that I just said. He works at a very specific school, the Island School, that has a lot of its own needs. A significant portion of the students in that school are homeless or in other significant financial distress. And he has really created a unique environment that celebrates the students, that helps them get to the additional things that they might need given their circumstances. very much focused around issues of social justice. He really has just done an incredible job and was extremely worthy of the $25,000 first place prize for last year.
Deadline, let's talk about that. How long does a person have before they can get their application in? What's the cutoff?
The timeline is now through December 15th. So you have a little bit of time, but but the best applications do take a little time. You can't just say, I want to nominate, Mrs. Smith. It does take a little bit more detail. You have to write specific reasons as to what creative things they've done. And the nomination form gives you a lot of prompts to get into some level of detail, but it will take a little time to do it right. So give yourself a little time. But the nomination process is open now at flagaward.org, and you have through December 15th.
Yeah. And talk to us about Bronxites. Have you heard a lot from Bronxites in this process?
Bronx, yeah, look, we won. Last year's award was only Manhattan teachers, okay, because it was the first time we'd ever done it, and we didn't want to overwhelm ourselves because we are a relatively small and new organization. But it was so successful last year in Manhattan, we've now expanded to include all 5 boroughs. So we're accepting nominations from all 5 boroughs of New York, not just Manhattan. And we've been already getting some fantastic nominations from the Bronx. So, keep it going, Bronx. We want to hear from you all. We want to see some more great Bronx teachers highlighted.
Yeah, we got the Bronx and New York City covered here on this show. And so want to make sure that everybody gets an opportunity to find out about this as we highlight teachers. Very quickly before we go, in this whole process, COVID-19, what have you learned the most about teachers?
Look, teachers are willing to do whatever it takes to get the job done. And that means if they have to teach on Zoom, because Zoom is a whole new thing, they're doing it. Just like we all are trying to figure this out one day at a time. I've never done my job on Zoom before, so I'm trying to figure out how to do it the best way, and I'm making some mistakes, and I'm learning from my mistakes. And I think teachers are the exact same way, and they're working with their students in a totally new technological environment, and yet the great teachers are figuring out a way to be successful on Zoom, just as they figured out a way to be most successful in person. And that's what makes a great person at any job. But there's a lot of great teachers figuring it out, and we're so proud of them all.
Yeah. Well, Glenn, thank you so much for, this award and putting it out there for our teachers, definitely essential workers for a time such as this. And we're glad to be able to tell people that there's an opportunity for somebody, and possibly from the Bronx, New York City, who will get that award. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Daren. It's my pleasure to be here.
And for more information, you can visit their website at flagaward.org. All right, well, I'm Daren Jaime, thanking you for joining us. We have come to the end of our show today. We want to thank all of our guests for joining us, and most of all, you, the viewer, for tuning in. And if you missed any part of today's show, don't forget the recablecast airs on Bronx, that's channel 67. If you have Optimum, that's channel 2133, or anytime on the web at bronxnet.org. For all of us here, I'm Daren Jaime saying take care, God bless, and most of all, keep this channel wide open.